I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt and out of the land of slavery. Therefore, you shall have no other gods before me, and you shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in the heavens above or the earth below. Those were the first two commandments that God gave to Israel after he brought them out of Egypt. He gave these commands to them through his servant Moses, and the people responded, having received the commands of God. Everything that God has commanded, we will do. Everything that God has commanded, we will do. And so Moses goes up to the mountain. He spends 40 days on the mountain with God, getting the stone tablets, the 10 commandments of God. And the people who are down at the camp, like teenagers experiencing freedom for the first time, they just go nuts. They go crazy. They engage in sexual immorality, drunken orgies, dancing around, saying that this is the God who brought us out of Egypt. And they go absolutely nuts. And if you're like me, you say, that's crazy. How could they do that for all that God's done for them? That's ridiculous. In fact, I'd never do anything like that. Or would we? Take a look at this short video clip, if we will.
I was watching TV the other day, and this show comes on with these religious fanatics. They were crazy. Well, you would think they were crazy if you didn't understand their culture and their religion. See, that's just the thing. They were worshippers of idols, and they took things to extremes. They painted their bodies. They wore these ridiculous costumes. They chanted, they danced, they made sacrifices to their idols. They built these enormous temples to worship their idols in. It seemed like their entire existence climaxed into this one scenario, this one over-the-top act of worship. You don't really relate, do you? Let's try it again. I was watching TV the other day, and this show comes on with these religious fanatics. They were crazy. See, that's just the thing. They were worshippers of idols, and they took things to extremes. And they painted their bodies. They wore these ridiculous costumes. They chanted, they danced, they made sacrifices to their idols. They built these enormous temples to worship their idols in. It seemed like their entire existence climaxed into this one scenario, this one over-the-top act of worship. Idol worship. It's not just about golden calves anymore.
Now that video may only describe some of us. I know it does me to a little bit. I've never painted my face or my body, and I don't think I'll go to that extreme, but I do get pretty infatuated and infuriated with Pittsburgh sports teams. I tape every pregame, every game, every postgame of the Steelers, Penguins, Pirates. I listen to the interviews. I read Pirates.com, Steelers.com, Penguins.com, Post-Gazette, Tribune Review, and it's especially frustrating being a Pirates fan these days. So it's easy for me to get infatuated with Pittsburgh sports. And you say, well, that's not me, Brady, right? That's probably not most of us. But I bet you that you have your own 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or more idols. Because an idol is anything that takes the place of God, or anything that distracts us from God. And that can be material things, right? Especially in our culture today, there are a lot of materialistic things that can become an idol. Anything from our cars, or even our houses. Do you know your house can be an idol? The way that you put time, effort, and energy into your home. Now that doesn't mean that your home is an idol, but it's possible. I think for many of us, the internet, and Facebook, and email can become an idol. For all of us, I think money can become an idol, right? Not just because we worship green paper, but because we're consumed by obtaining money. Or we're consumed by not having enough money. And not because we love money, but because we love the security that it brings. So money, for many of us, can become an idol. Did you know that even your own families can become an idol? If you spend all your time and energy and effort and money into your kids and what your kids are involved with, and if that distracts you from God, that too can become an idol. Did you know that food and alcohol can become an idol? The way that alcohol can consume you. And I know that many of you have had to live with that God-forsaken idol of alcohol. And how about food? I mean, we all love food, but some of us love food to the point where we're consumed by it, where we can't get enough of it, and food can become an idol. And I think the biggest ones for me, and I bet many of us, are the idols of control and comfort. You see, because I love to be comfortable. I have my schedule the way I want it. I try and plan my day and you want a roof over your head and warmth, and you just want to be comfortable. And the idolatry and the idols of food and comfort can be a big idol for most of us. And I think the question for us is this: if we can have God, and we can have salvation, and everything that God offers to us, why in the world would we run to anything else other than Him? That's hard to believe sometimes. And I think sometimes we just simply become bored. Sometimes we're simply complaining or we're ungrateful. But I think the biggest reason is because God is invisible. And because we can't see and touch God, we then begin to put our time and energy and effort into things that we can see. And before long, we've gone down that slippery slope of idolatry. And that's exactly what happened to the Israelites up there on Mount Sinai. So God sees what's going on. He sees this dancing and this engagement of drunken orgies, and He gets absolutely furious, as you can imagine. Because you know what God has just done for these people. Brought them out of Egypt. And now these people are saying to this golden calf, "You have brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery." And God is ticked off. And He says, "I'm going to destroy these people." And He would have absolutely every right to do so. He would absolutely have every right to completely wipe these people off the face of the map. But Moses steps in and says, "God, please don't do that." And what I want you to see and pay very close attention to is what Moses does. Because you and I have the same authority that Moses does. And listen to his example. He appeals to God's compassion and His mercy. And he says, "God, if you take these people out, what will the Egyptians say? They'll say that you brought us out of Egypt just to come to this mountain to die, and God, you don't want to do that. Please, God, have mercy on us." And he appeals to God's promises. He says, "God, remember the promise that you made to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob? The promise that our descendants would number the stars in the sky? Oh God, remember your promises." And he begs with God, and he pleads with God, and then miraculously, the text says that God relents. He changes his course of action. And in fact, some texts say that God changed His mind. And I think it's important to see what happens from a human perspective compared to what happens from God's perspective. But God seemingly changes His course of action because of human interaction with Moses. And I want you to see something very carefully here, is that you and I have that same authority to have God move and to have God act based on our prayers. Listen to what Jesus says in the New Testament. Jesus said, "Whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be done to you. He says that in Mark 11. And in John 14, Jesus says, I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Son might give glory to the Father. So first of all, believe that you will have received it. Ask for whatever you want in my name, and I will give glory to the Father. And then in John 15:7, Jesus says, if you remain in me, and I in you, ask for whatever you want in my name, and it will be given to you. Do you hear the promises that Jesus says? Believe that you will receive it. Pray it in my name. Remain in me and do it for the Father's glory, and I will give you what you ask. That's the promise of Jesus. And I think a lot of us think that prayer is simply overcoming God's reluctance, right? That God doesn't really want to give us these things, but rather prayer is laying hold of God's highest willingness. It's kind of like a banquet table, that God has all these good things and all these good gifts to give to us if we would only ask for it. That's why God says in the Lord's Prayer, pray, your kingdom come, God. Your will be done to earth as it is in heaven. God has given you and me the authority to make God move and to make God act if we would only pray. And in fact, you know what God says about church? More than anything else, He says this is to be a house of prayer. If God's people would only humble themselves and pray and remain in Jesus, think of what would happen in your life and in this church if we would only stop to pray. And Moses takes hold of that promise, and God seemingly changes his mind. But even though God decides He's not going to completely wipe out the Israelites, there is still heck to pay for their sin of idolatry. And so Moses comes storming down the mountain. And you've already known by now that Moses has a bit of a temper himself. He takes the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments, smashes them at the foot of the mountain. He goes to the golden calf that they were worshiping, and he throws it into the fire. He makes the golden calf become powder. He wipes it out into the water, and he makes the Israelites drink the remains of the golden calf. Now, where was the strength of that golden calf when it was being burned and incinerated in the fire? Right? How powerful was that God now that it simply burns up without a fight? It's ground into powder, and Moses makes the Israelites drink the golden calf. You wanted this, God? You wanted the golden calf? Well, you can have them. In fact, you can drink it up, Moses says. And he also reprimands Aaron, because Aaron is Moses' brother. He's supposed to represent God to the people. He's supposed to be a man of God. And what does he do? But let the people get out of control. He says, give me all your jewelry, all your gold. And listen to his excuse that he gives to Moses. He said, Moses, they were just concerned that you weren't coming back, and we didn't know what to do. And so people just gave me this jewelry, and we just threw it into the fire, and how came this calf? I don't know how it happened. And he takes no responsibility for his own sin. And that just reminds me that you and I often do the same thing. It's like, well, that pornographic picture just came to me in an email, so I had to look at it. Or there was just a lot of alcohol at the party, and I just had to drink it. Or there were cakes and cookies all throughout my house, and it would go bad if somebody didn't eat it, so I had to eat it. And on, and on, and on. But I want you to see how serious God takes the sin of idolatry, because He wasn't done. He had Moses stand at the foot of the camp. And Moses said, if anybody is for the Lord, come over to me. And all the Levites, the priests, came over to Moses. And Moses said, I want you to take your sword, strap it to your side, and I want you to go throughout the camp, killing all of the people who are against the Lord. And that includes your friends, or relatives or what have you. And the Levites went throughout the camp, killing people with the sword. And the text says that 3,000 people died that very day. And you say, that's pretty serious. That doesn't sound very godly. That doesn't sound very compassionate. In fact, that surely doesn't sound like Jesus, does it? Or does it? Because Jesus said something very similar in Matthew 10. Jesus said, I have come not necessarily to bring peace, but a sword. And on the account of my coming, that will divide family from family, friends from friends, mothers against daughters, brothers against brothers. And this just came to me, and I don't know if there's anything to this, but I wonder if Jesus was referencing this very passage when he said, I've come to bring a sword. Because the very coming of Jesus, the very lordship of Jesus will divide even families. And not only does God take people out with the sword, but because of the sin of idolatry and how serious an offense it is, he also killed some of the rest of the people by a plague, or the text says some kind of physical affliction. And you guys, this is a really incredible scene, if you think about it. From the craziness and from the people, the Israelites who were dancing around this golden calf, to the anger of God against idolatry, to the anger of Moses against the people and his brother Aaron. But what I want you to see is just how serious God sees the sin of idolatry. And think about those things that I mentioned, and maybe your own sins of idolatry. Because idolatry literally makes God sick. God says in Isaiah, I am Yahweh. That is my name, and I will give my glory to no one else. And when you and I invest time, energy, and effort into anything or anyone else, you are breaking the heart of God. And God has created you and so designed you that you would find all of your significance and meaning and purpose in Him. And when we put that effort into anything else, we are falling so far short of what God has for us. And I know that God's invisible, and I know that it's really easy to get distracted by people and things of this earth. But God reminds us of what can happen when we go into the sin of idolatry. And I don't want the same thing to happen to us that happened to the Israelites. I don't want us to say, well, Jesus isn't coming back anytime soon, so let's just see what we can get ourselves into. And God says, idolatry breaks my heart, and I've created you for more than that. God says, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of slavery from sin and death and insignificance by the sending of my own Son. So therefore, you shall have no other gods before me. As we close in prayer this morning, I will ask you to get honest before God and ask Him, God, I want you to show me what are the idols that are in my life. And I pray that God's Spirit, He says He will lead us into all truth. So would you be willing to pray, Holy Spirit of God, would you show me right now the distractions and the idols in my life that I need to get rid of? So let's go and pray and ask that God might do that this morning.